March 14th, 2011 Planning Commission meeting, and we will begin with public comments on items not listed on the agenda. I don't see any public aside from the applicants here, so we'll move on to item number 3, the 3A, which is LE 1002, a request for a continuance update of the Oregon City Water Master Plan and ancillary plan to the Oregon City Comprehensive Plan. I'll begin by reading the statement prior to opening the first quasi-judicial public hearing on the agenda. LE 1002, public hearings on land use applications are scheduled tonight. The staff report has been prepared for each application and has been made available to the public 7 days before the first public hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the Commission will follow is set out in state law and Oregon City Municipal Code. The hearing procedure steps are shown on the chart. We're going to wait for, there's the chart today. To my right. Anyone wishing to speak should fill out a speaker's card and give it to the planning staff before the hearing. Speakers will proceed in the order in which their card is received. You should fill out your address on the card so that the city can notify you of its final decision. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name. Testimony and evidence should be directed toward the applicable approvable criteria. If you believe other criteria apply, in addition to those addressed in the staff report, identify and discuss those criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. A person may submit any written material while the public record is open on each application. Any written materials received by the city staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to the city staff in order to become part of the record. If a person intends for PowerPoint presentations, oversized poster boards, reports, pictures, or other exhibits used in their oral testimony to be placed in the record, copies must be submitted to the city staff while the record is open. If they are not given to staff, they will not be included in the record. Any person wishing a continuance to present additional evidence and testimony or to keep the record open to respond to new evidence must make that request before the public testimony portion of the hearing is closed. If the Planning Commission makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue that you may wish to appeal must have been raised for the consideration of the City Commission or LUBA or both. Without raising the issue on the record with sufficient specificity and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond, the issue will not be deemed appealable to the State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Now we will open the record for Oregon City file number LE 1002, a request for a continuance for update of the Oregon City Water Master Plan and ancillary plan to the Oregon City Comprehensive Plan. Does any commissioner have any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or other statement to declare?
I do not.
No.
No.
I have no ex parte contact.
No. I have none as well. And there's no site visit, and we have no audience to question. We will now commence with the planning staff report.
All right. As the city's continuing to address outstanding items, we request that the project LE 1002 be continued until May 23rd, 2011.
If there's no discussion, we can have a motion, I believe. Commissioner, maybe?
Actually, I do have some questions about the plan, and I don't know if I should do them now so that you can maybe address them at the May 23rd, or just hold them until they're till May 23rd. So.
If you want to hold them until May 23rd, hopefully we'll address most of those in the staff report. And then the applicant can address them at the hearing as well.
Okay. In that case, I move we continue.
Excuse me?
Oh, as soon as she's done.
I had my hand raised, but you couldn't see me because your hand was raised. Laura, are these, could you talk about what the substantive nature of these particular items that are still outstanding are?
I cannot. I know that they're working forward on a couple of suggestion items that the city had, or that the public had suggested, but I'm not sure exactly what those items are.
Okay. They haven't discussed it with you?
They have not discussed it with me.
Can I ask them?
Commissioner McGriff?
May I ask them, the
Us.
applicant?
Ask the applicant.
Yes.
It's a legislative action, so yes, you can. If you want, you can send it to me. Pete Walter is actually the planner who's
Right.
working with Public Works on creating this master plan. So we weren't expecting anything tonight, so I didn't have him come. He's the one who could probably answer most of the questions that either of you may have. And Carrie, correct me if I'm wrong, but because this is a legislative action, you can feel free to send questions to myself and Pete as well. And we can try to respond to those, and we'll put those into the record to answer anything that you may have, any questions you may have. That'd
Well,
probably be the most
that was
best
my
way to do
question.
it. Yeah. I'm sorry.
The
Well,
question I asked Laura, that is my question. So I
Okay.
wanted to know if I could ask them what else they need to submit, or what else do they want to submit, so I can get a clearer picture. Because this is March, we're talking April, we're talking May.
I don't see any problem with sending a request to what they're still working on. That's what you're
Yes, that's
you're
just my
trying to
question.
figure out is
Yeah, I'm just trying to-
what they're updating in the plan,
Right.
and why.
I don't necessarily need to know why, I
Okay,
just want to
wanna
know why are we having another delay?
Okay.
I mean, we can, I'm not saying I'm opposed to it, I'm just curiosity.
And I apologize. I don't have the exact reason for why they've decided to continue it at this point. They're
Okay,
continuing
well,
to work
I'll
on
send
that
Pete
master
an email
plan.
then.
Okay, that'd be the best way to do it.
So
turn.
we're looking for a motion.
I think you already made the motion, yeah?
I was starting to
Okay,
before
go ahead.
I cut Denise off. So, I move that we continue LE 10-02 until May 23rd, 2011.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Kidwell,
Aye.
Commissioner Espy,
Aye.
Commissioner McGriff,
Aye.
Commissioner Mabey,
Aye.
Commissioner Henkin, Commissioner Groner,
Aye.
Chair Stein.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Next item on our hearing agenda, 3B, the conditional use 1003 and conditional use permit 1003 and concept plan, concept plan and conditional use 1003 for the South Fork Water Board. And we don't need to read the quasi-judicial hearing script. Okay.
That is correct, but I would ask you
Yes.
to inquire with the commissioners whether anybody since the last hearings had any ex parte contacts or new conflicts of interest to declare.
Thank you. So do any commissioners have an ex parte contact or conflict of interest to declare since we last met?
I have none.
I paid a stealth visit to the site, but they didn't see me and I didn't see them.
I attended a meeting at the water plant. As I stated last time, I'm part of the manager's advisory committee, and there was an advisory meeting. The only item in relation to this that came up was that he did mention that he had some of his staff taking pictures as per our request for massing plans, but that was the extent of the...
He is John Collins?
Yes.
Yeah.
I have no ex parte contact.
None.
Since the last meeting, I drove around the neighborhood and visited the site.
Okay. I have not had additional ex parte contact either. Does anybody have any questions for Commissioner Mabey?
Or any of the other commissioners?
Or any of the other commissioners? Thank you.
No,
We're just singling him out, that's all.
I'm trouble.
Well, we know that.
Oh, not
All
mine.
right, that's not my
Laura,
phone.
can we have the staff report?
Sure. If we can have Renee pull down the slideshow, please. So the applicant is the South Fork Water Board, and they've submitted a master plan and for the site located.
I'd like to hang on to while that gets
Sure.
done or whatever it's doing there.
All right. So the applicant has submitted a master plan and a conditional use application for the property located at 15962 Hunter Avenue. And I'm just going to switch computers real quick.
So you know about this switch, right? You switch this.
Before we begin talking, I just wanted to go over the master plan
Push it to the
process
left.
and the conditional use process. So a master plan is also referred to as a concept plan or a general development plan, and what it takes a look at is the long-term development of a site. Generally, it's over a 20-year period. In this case, it's also over a 20-year period. So it'll take a look at how the site will be developed and where that development's going to go on the site, how intense will that development be, what is the general phasing of that development, the massing of that development, and the impact of that development. Also, the applicant can request adjustments to certain sections of the Oregon City Municipal Code. So the concept master plan in general just looks at a general picture of the site. It doesn't look at too detailed of development. That'll come later with the detailed development plan, which is a type 2 application, and that's where we'll take a look at items like landscaping and very specific items to the site, and compare it with the requirements of the Oregon City Municipal Code, which is more clear and objective than the master plan code. If the applicant submits a detailed development plan and it is not in keeping with the master plan, then they'll have to come back for a master plan amendment. So say they want to build another building, or the building sizes they propose are much bigger than what they showed you tonight, they're going to have to come back to you again and get an amendment to that. So there's a conditional use as well, which says that the general development is generally compatible with the permitted uses of the zoning designation. However, conditional uses can sometimes have more impact. And we want to take a look at that impact and make sure that that impact is mitigated. So in this case, it's interesting because we're looking at master plan, which is real general, and then we're also looking at impact of a site. So if you want to talk about things like landscaping, which are very specific, it would have to be tied to a criteria of the master plan or the conditional use of how that specific landscaping is going to impact the neighbors. Example of that is they proposed to install landscaping, and we don't have standards for landscaping of where they propose to install it, so we want to make sure that now we get in those specific criteria so we know when they come back for that detailed development plan what the standards will be. So on to the site, which is located in Holcomb Boulevard, or in the Holcomb neighborhood. It's bounded by Park Place neighborhood by Holcomb. It's bounded by Thurman and Hunter, which are designated as local streets, as well as Swan, which is designated as a collector. So there's 2 tax lots, but 1 site. You can take a look at this picture and see what the surrounding neighborhood looks like. Most of it was developed under Clackamas County jurisdiction, so it's a lot less dense than typically city would have. North of the site on Thurman, you can tell that those properties redeveloped since they've been annexed into the city in 1998. As part of that development, they had to install things like sidewalks and pavement of the street and whatnot as well. So we would expect when the rest of the area around the site develops, they too would install those public improvements. So if we take a closer look at the site, we notice a couple of things. One is that all of the buildings are generally grouped together. So there's a little bit of open space kind of in the northwest corner and the southeast corner of the site. There's a couple of pictures of what the site looks like. You can tell that a lot of the buildings are not incredibly tall. So what have they proposed to do? Over this next 20-year period, they've proposed 3 phases of development. Here's an overview of those phases of development. There's also things like utilities and pipelines and things like that that are underground that are not in this, but they're in your application. In the plan, you can see that everything in that greenish color is a structure, and then that bluish color is a pavement. So everything that's outlined is new development. If you take a look at this graph to the right, or the chart to the right, you can see that the development that is closest to Thurman, these three buildings, are all about 20 feet in height.
Could you use the mouse pointer for
Sure.
us? Thanks.
These three right here are all about 20 feet in height, and that's to the eave of the structures. And this building here is also about 20 feet in height to the eave of the structures. And the rest of the structures are much shorter. They're all under 12 feet in height, generally about 5 to 8 feet or so. So the taller development is limited to the existing building, which is right here, and then up here and right there. And then all the shorter buildings are all kind of grouped together as well. So the phases are 5 years apart, the first one starting in 2015, 2020, and ending in 2025. So what code does apply? These are all the code sections that apply, but again, we're taking kind of a windshield view of the site. We did review the site as it stands today with the development proposal against our current code criteria and came up with a couple of standards which it doesn't meet, which means it's non-conforming, which is why you see the non-conforming code on there. Example of that would be the parking lot design. There's no landscaping, there's no defined stalls or anything like that. So when a site is non-conforming, it kicks in our non-conforming code, which requires that 10% of the improvements of exterior alterations go towards improving the site for certain criteria. And we'll get to that in a little bit as well.
Laura?
Yes.
Isn't it just non-conforming because it's industrial and a residential? I mean, isn't it
No.
kind of just umbrella non-conforming?
That would make it a conditional use because it's institutional. But the non-conforming would be the actual standards of development and it not complying with each one of those standards as it stands today. So when you apply for a master plan, you can get adjustment to the municipal code. The applicant has applied for 6 adjustments. The city has supported one of the adjustments and recommended approval with conditions on 3 of the adjustments and recommended the Planning Commission deny 2 of the adjustments. We'll go through each of them. But if you look at the adjustment criteria, it takes a look at what is the standard that's being adjusted and what's the intent of that standard. How is the adjustment playing against that intent? Are they mitigating that adjustment? And so forth. So the first one is fence height.
Excuse me, Laura, did you say they were applying for that under the master plan or they're applying for that under the conditional use permit?
Under the master plan.
Okay.
Right. And the first adjustment is a fence height. So the site was developed in the early 50s. It has seen incremental development since then. We don't know when the fence height or when the fence got constructed, but there is a fence that surrounds the site. It's 6 feet tall all the way around. Our code allows a 6-foot tall fence next to and behind the front of the structure. In this case, as it applies to the site, the structures that are furthest north towards Thurman, anything between that side of the building and the property line on Thurman is only allowed to be 3.5 feet tall, and everything else can be 6 feet tall. The applicant has applied for an adjustment to allow the 6-foot tall all the way around because it may or may not have been in place before we had a fence height limitation. If it was in place, they could apply for non-conforming for the fence, but instead they applied for an adjustment. The purpose of the fence is to allow, limiting the fence height is to allow interaction between the structure and the street and to provide an attractive streetscape. Since they are not actually having anybody in the buildings, most of them won't be staffed along that street area, that they determined that the standard is not really applicable to the site, and then they also proposed a mitigation of a landscaping buffer. Again, there is no standard for landscaping buffers along a site like that, so staff proposed that the landscaping be developed to the standards of a perimeter parking lot landscaping standard, and the applicant has also proposed that at full maturity, the landscaping covers 50% of the building facade as well. The second adjustment is for fence material. So back to this fence. It's chain link. Within the last few years, the city has not allowed chain link fences in the city. The purpose of that is to keep our natural beauty and restore a high quality of building materials. The applicant has proposed that when the sections of fence are replaced, they are replaced with black vinyl or powder coated fencing. So with that, we recommend condition of approval.
for clarification,
Yeah.
it'll still be chain link, it just won't be the exposed metal. It'll be-
Right. It'll be the black chain link.
Right, so it'll
recovered.
still be the, okay,
It'll still be there.
that's fine.
So what's the difference between black vinyl, because the chain link that's colored is powder coated? When I think when you're saying black vinyl, to me, I come up with those plastic fences that you see, and that they're made out of vinyl.
They've not proposed the slats. You mean the slats between the fence or the actual fence material?
The fence material, 'cause are you saying, I'm trying to clarify, what's the black vinyl?
It would not be like how you would see an erosion control fence, like a fence actually made out of plastic. It would
Oh,
just be a
okay.
vinyl covering around that chain link.
It looked like a black painted chain link
Fence,
fence, correct?
yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
Maybe-
that's a
maybe you
good
should
point
just-
of clarification.
Yeah, clarify that.
And that's true whether or not black vinyl is used or a powder coating is used. It will be black.
It'll still look black, yeah,
Right.
exactly. So staff has recommended that be approved. The third one is for pedestrian access ways. The city's requirements are that buildings are connected to each other and that they're also connected with the street. Provides safe movement for pedestrians along a site. In this case, not a lot of the buildings will actually be housed with people. There might be a maintenance guy checking on a certain building from time to time, but this won't be a fully staffed site. And in light of that, staff has recommended that the Planning Commission approve the adjustment, which would not allow pedestrian access ways. Pedestrian access ways are also in our non-conforming code. So we talked about having 10% of your development proposal go to make things that are non-conforming conforming, and it would require that these pedestrian access ways be installed. So if this adjustment is approved, they will not have to do that in the list of non-conforming things. The fourth adjustment is for parking lot landscaping, specifically interior and perimeter parking lot landscaping. The purpose of this requirement is to soften the appearance of parking lots, allow for cooling with shades, for air and water pollution, reduce stormwater impacts, and also just make a more inviting place for pedestrians and bicyclists. The applicant has not proposed any mitigation for this adjustment, so the city has recommended to deny this adjustment. This is also one of those things which are required for the non-conforming, so 10% of the development cost would go towards making the parking lot in compliance with this standard, which would mean when they install development over time, they might have to install interior parking lot landscaping islands and things like that. The fifth adjustment proposed is for design standards. It's specifically design standards for institutional and commercial buildings. The purpose of this regulation is to provide a compatible impact or compatible development, buildings that serve multiple tenants. They encourage items to be built to a human scale. With this, the applicant has proposed a couple of things. One is that they've limited the height of the buildings. The zoning designation allows the structures to be 35 feet tall. They've limited the height of those proposed structures, so we know that they're not going to be overbearing or having a very large massing. We also know the location of those structures, which are grouped together, also to limit the impact on neighboring development. And also they have proposed the landscaping buffer to which would cover 50% of those structures which are 20 feet tall, which we pointed to earlier, to also mitigate. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission approve this request. However, we recommend that the buildings which are 12 feet and tall, those 4 buildings, do meet our standards for wall articulation, massing, and roof treatment. Now, those buildings that are proposed, when they come through with a detailed development plan, will still have to meet our building material standards. They just won't have to meet things like windows because they'll be large tanks or large industrial type buildings. The last adjustment is for sidewalk and street improvements. The purpose of this regulation is to provide a safe and continuous and efficient transportation system. The staff has proposed a number of street improvements for the project, and the applicant has proposed different street improvements. Here's just a general overview. The city is looking for travel lanes and potentially some pavement on the opposite side of the center lane for all the streets, sidewalks, street trees along Swan, Thurman, and a bike lane along Swan as well. The applicant has proposed no improvements along Thurman, to widen the pavement along Hunter rather than widen the pavement, install sidewalks, street trees. And then he's proposed to meet our collector standards for Swan as well. So, in this, staff concluded that there's no mitigation that was proposed, just standards that don't meet our municipal code. So we recommend the Planning Commission deny this adjustment. In the past, the city has never requested that the applicant provide dedication or any public improvements since the site's been constructed in 1958. Now, there was a time in 2007 when the applicant wanted to install a clear well. At the time, the master plan code said if you want to do a site plan design review, you'll also have to come in for a master plan for all institutional sites over 10 acres in size. This site was slightly over 10 acre in size, so they donated about 8,000 square feet to the public right-of-way and became just under 10 acres in size and went forward with a site plan design review and a conditional use, and were thus not required to do a master plan. So again, they're still not required to do a master plan today, but they can as an option. So since there have been no improvements along the site, it's this perimeter of the site already does not have any improvements. There are no sidewalks, there are no nothing. The applicants also proposed to double the capacity of the site. Right now, it's operating at a maximum of 22 million gallons per day for the water treatment. After this is done, it'll result in 40 million gallons per day. They've also proposed to nearly double the number of structures on site with another 16. The code, Oregon City Municipal Code, requires street improvements, and this is also in our comprehensive plan, supported by 1 goal and 4 policies as well. As surrounding development occurs, it will also have to do the street improvements. As we saw, it was north of the site. So we would expect that all those neighboring properties will also be subject to the standard, and that this site would be more compatible with the neighboring properties if it was also subject to the standards. The applicant would also be allowed 20 years to implement all street improvements, which is towards the end of phase 3. So those are the completion of the adjustments. There are a couple issues we want to clear up real quick. The first is barbed wire fencing. The Oregon City Municipal Code requires that if there's barbed wire fencing, it is approved by the city manager. Now, there's a sort of a gap in the history of the site. We don't know when the barbed wire fencing came into effect, so we just wanted to put it out in the open and clarify and get a support from the Planning Commission to the city manager, who ultimately decides if barbed wire is appropriate or not. So we're looking for a determination on if the application is appropriate, if barbed wire fencing is appropriate, and this last one, which is parking. So Chapter 1752 of the Oregon City Municipal Code provides parking standards based on uses. There's no use for this utility development. There's not even a comparable use. So what the applicant did was they looked up the DLCD model code, Portland's code, and Tigard's code, who all have an NA, or not a parking minimum and also not a parking maximum, for parking, and present it to you to see if they could use that standard as well. The city staff supports that standard because on one hand we also know how big the parking lot is going to be, so however many parking stalls they put in that space wouldn't really affect the neighboring site or the site itself. So with that, we recommend that you support the barbed wire fence to the city manager, and support the proposed parking standard of not applicable. They would still have to meet for the parking stalls. They do propose the dimensional standards, landscaping, things like that. It's just the number of minimum and maximum would be 0 or would be not applicable. And then also that you approve the proposed development with conditions. Are there any questions?
Do we know what the Department of Homeland Security requires for a security fence?
We do not. The applicant can talk about that a little bit more. I know that they have a security plan that they can talk about.
Commissioner Tidwell, any questions?
Questions at this time? Any questions either?
Commissioner Maybe.
Yeah. On the street improvements, so I guess it's slide 14. There you go. The on Hunter Avenue, one of the last items that you have for the staff recommendation is the dedication of a 2.5-foot strip on the 2 tax lots. Is this in addition to the land that was already dedicated off of Hunter?
There was no land that was dedicated in 2007 for Hunter. It was off Thurman and the most northern tax lot off Swan. So all of these, all this dedication improvements is exclusive of that. So yes, it's not included in what was previously done. They proposed dedication of corresponding land too. So our numbers would match their numbers for dedication on Hunter.
Okay. And just to be clear, basically all the work that's going to occur on the site is going to enter and exit off of Hunter based on what I see for their work and all that.
Exactly. There's 2 curb cuts and they're both off Hunter.
So this is just, Joe Common Guy asking this question. If they're coming and going off Hunter, why do they have to do anything to Thurman or Swan? I mean, if the fence is going to stay up and it's going to stay intact, why do they have to do sidewalks and tree plantings? And I mean, I could see if I was building my house that I'd have to do something, for my front yard and put in my sidewalk, but why do I have to put in a sidewalk when my backyard is 100 yards away from my front yard?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are a couple of ways to answer that. One is that, it is putting an impact on the city. The site is nearly doubling with structures and capacity, and they are doing a lot to the site. The city comprehensive plan and municipal code just requires sidewalks, so there really wouldn't be any reason why not to do sidewalks or street improvements or anything like that. And then also, it would also be required for subdivisions, which is what you alluded to, and we know that the area around the site would develop as probably with land divisions, and they would be required to do it. So from a conditional use standpoint, it actually would make the site more compliant with the adjacent neighbors if you didn't install sidewalks. That maybe that is an adverse impact on the adjacent properties, because if it was developed as residential, they would do sidewalks. And also we have these greater city needs to connect our pedestrian system in the city as well. And they've never had to do improvements ever before. And it's a 20-year plan, so they would have 20 years to implement those improvements as well. So.
Okay. So a pedestrian at this point would come up the steep slope of Hunter, which has no sidewalks.
Either side.
Although there's like 1 or 2 houses that have it for their length. And then eventually hit the treatment plant, and then they'd be able to go with your request basically all the way around the treatment plant, Hunter, Thurman, Swan, and head back down Swan without, which again has no sidewalks, but they'd at least be safe while they went around the plant.
Yeah, and the idea is that as other properties develop too, that they'll incrementally install sidewalks, or that the city would install sidewalks if it was listed on a plan and they had acquired funding for that. So in general, all development's required to do sidewalks, and eventually all these little gaps will kind of line up.
Okay.
Commissioner McGriff.
I thought that I read your staff report very thoroughly, and maybe it's just because we're an hour off. I'm confused. You started out your presentation with an overview of the adjustments, and then I asked you a clarifying question, and now I'm more confused.
Oh dear. How can I help you?
I think that I asked you whether or not the adjustments were involved with the
conditional use or
Master
Or,
plan.
or the master plan or the concept master plan.
The criteria for an adjustment is in the master plan code. So I am tying the two together when it comes to improvements for that argument that the site would be more compliant if there were sidewalks around it as a conditional use, because if you were a permitted use, you would have to install sidewalks, but
I just
I'm
wonder,
sorry for
did
explaining
I
that.
miss the adjustment stuff in your staff report?
the adjustments, they should be page like 16 through
Okay,
30.
because I just tried to find them again, and I thought, okay, I was pretty sure I thought I've read them. So,
They're like 16 through 32-ish, somewhere around there. But it's in 17. It's at the end of the master plan criteria. And there are those separate criteria for each
Right.
adjustment, so they're each analyzed
okay,
separately.
I'm with you now.
Okay.
Commissioner Groner, any questions?
None right now.
I have a question regarding the fence. Having difficulty imagining what the concept master plan says, the perimeter of the site looks like from the street, with the street improvements. So if I'm standing in the street, I see the street, I see the curb, I see a planting strip, a sidewalk, and now do I see a 6-foot-high fence immediately, or do I see some distance, a landscaped buffer, and then the 6-foot-high fence with the razor wire on top of it?
That's a good question. So I assume you're talking from the northernmost property, Thurman,
Well,
because the
any of them.
landscape buffer is not on the two sides. It's only on, let me show you a map. There's a little bit on Swan, but it's mainly on Thurman. At that
I'm
light
concerned
green.
with, I think, all three edges of the perimeter. I think Swan is the street that the applicant has agreed requires the full treatment, because there are housing developments going on just across the street from that. But
It's a collector.
so in general, yeah, you're talking about the perimeter from Thurman and Hunter?
For the landscaping buffer,
Uh-huh.
it's a little small. Let me see if I can make this bigger for you, but, oops. It's right here and it's right here. So this side is Swan. So it's, there's a lot of trees on the site right now. So there's a lot of trees grouped in the southeast corner of the site, and then also the northwest corner. So this would be connecting those groupings of trees and installing the perimeter, the parking lot perimeter there. The code,
More specifically, I'm wondering, is the chain link fence adjacent to the sidewalk? Is it right next to the sidewalk, or is there
Should
a
be on the-
6-foot buffer that's landscaped between the edge of the sidewalk and the fence?
I will bring up the applicant to answer exactly where the fence is in relationship to the property line, but the landscaping will be installed from the property line back, and if the fence is on the property line, then it would be right on the edge of that sidewalk, because it would go on Thurman. There would be no planter strip. There would be planter strips on the other ones, because we have this landscaping buffer there. So it would just be sidewalk, fence, landscaping if the fence is on the property line. I think the applicant
Okay,
can
so
clarify.
then, what is the mitigation then to encroach to have that encroachment of the fence onto the sidewalk? I don't understand.
It'd be adjacent to.
It'd be adjacent, but, so somebody's going to rub their shoulders against the chain link fence or the razor wire as they walk down the sidewalk.
Hopefully not the razor wire. It'll be up above.
Yeah, the razor wire is on top of the
Yeah.
6-foot fence. There's three strands of it. So we can have the applicant come up and talk about it. I'm not sure exactly where the fence is in relationship to the property line.
But that meets all the city codes and standards to put a chain link fence adjacent to a sidewalk. Is
We
that
do not
true?
have a setback for fences
Okay,
of any kind.
all right.
So unless
Whether they're
it's on a
6
corner.
foot tall or 3 foot tall, there's no setback.
There's no setback. We only get interested in the placement and height when you're on a corner, so you can see around a corner.
Yep.
But other than that, there's
Okay.
no, you can go straight to their property
Got
lines.
it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the applicant's submittal, and I'm seeing on Thurman, there's about a 6 to 10 foot buffer between the edge of the pavement and the fence. It's kind of hard to see, but in the center picture, it's pretty illustrative. And then on the left-hand side, there's the barbed wire fence, and there's a little bit of a buffer, it appears, too. So it might be.
The edge of the pavement is not the property line.
Right.
This is
Right,
OC
probably.
map, which is
Probably
a
comes to the fence or
rough-
somewhere, maybe even beyond, but.
yeah. So the applicant can
We
clear.
have the applicant come up
Yeah.
and speak
Yeah.
to it. They can probably clarify.
Great.
Any other questions for staff?
But not quite that close.
Commissioner McGriff.
She's just going to show it again.
There you go. That's what I was actually trying to see.
Yeah.
Then also at this time, I'd like to enter a couple exhibits into the record. I enter the PowerPoint into the record as Exhibit 1, and then also the attachments I forgot to provide to you of the Portland Code, DLCD Code, and Tigard Code as attachment, or Exhibit 2. All right.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Way.
Let me bring up the.
Next, we'll ask the applicant to come up.
Can you just get rid of the slides on the side so that the screen is, the picture's a little larger there?
You don't need this right now, do you?
No, but we could have it for background while I'm talking, I guess.
You want to leave it up there?
Yeah, leave it up there while I'm talking, and then if I need to gesture at the site, those forms would work.
Actually, just click the X where the slides were. I think that'll make those go away. Not that X.
Or
See where it said,
You're good.
okay, sorry. See where it said slide and outline? There's a little X next to it. If you click that X, yeah, those will,
I think that's what-
there you go. Thank you.
1 out of 3.
I'm not computer savvy, but I did know that.
So, Commissioners, thank you again for having us back and giving us the opportunity to present the project and answer your questions. My name is Ben Schoenberger. I'm a consultant with Winterbrook Planning, and we helped prepare the proposal along with Pete Kreft to my right from MWH, the engineers on the project, and John Collins, the general manager of the South Fork Water Board. So I'll lead it off, and since we had our own session 2 weeks ago to talk about the project, I'm not going to go into the same level of detail, but just to address some of the issues from the staff report and then kind of just open it up for your questions. I guess the key points are just very broadly about the project, that this site has been operating for 50 years or more than 50 years at the site, and this proposal is a long-range, long-term proposal that invests in the city and in this particular location. And we've tried really hard to be a good neighbor throughout this process. It's been about a year and a half, I guess, that we've been working through this, and have heard good things from the neighborhood, and we'd like to sort of keep that as part of the future of this site as well. I would like to point out that there's no actual change in the use itself, that this is a basic utilities use or public utilities use, and that's not going to change. It is going to expand significantly in terms of the amount of water that's processed and the facilities that are on site, but that the use at its heart is still the same use as it has been for the last 50 years. And given the size of the site, which is just slightly under 10 acres, and the placement of the buildings and the location of the natural resources, that overall it's a significantly, it's a rather low impact for the kind of activities that are happening on the site. There's a table on page 21 of the September submittal, the original land use submittal, that kind of talks about where I think the sort of 30,000-foot look at this, that there are no traffic impacts, no significant traffic impacts that was sort of agreed upon by the city's traffic engineer, no real noise, no environmental impacts, no air quality impacts. This is a concept plan, and part of that principle is we're addressing the broad layout of the site over time and what impacts those things will have on the site. So we've tried to address all of those things. And what we're asking you to do is kind of sign off on the overall approach here. And that part of that, as well as the master plan process, is it's a two-stage process. So we'll be coming back to the city for the details of this process, building materials and exact placement of the site, and whether these buildings are going to be 18 feet or 19 and a half feet or 20 feet 6 inches. These buildings haven't been designed, and the exact footprints and the exact species of plants and those things haven't really been chosen yet. So we're not going to be able to speak to that level of detail, but we certainly can talk about how the layout has gone and what we think the impacts of these buildings are going to be. So that's just the general overview of that. Now, I'd like to talk quickly about some of the adjustments, since that's sort of part of what's come out of this staff report. I won't spend hardly any time on the ones that we obviously agree with, and those with the conditions that have been applied are fence height, fence material, pedestrian access ways, and design standards. So 1, 2, 3, and 5, we don't really have any significant issues with Laura's recommendations on those. But we're going to push back a little bit on the other two. I'll start with the street improvements and sidewalk improvements. Again, we're not creating any new demand, and that's not true. We're not creating significant new demand. And already land has been donated to the public right-of-way as part of the 2007 approval, and that the amount of water that we're processing or buildings that don't have any or not significant vehicular or pedestrian activities associated with them is not completely relevant to major street and sidewalk improvements. So nevertheless, we thought it was reasonable, as being a good neighbor, to provide some level of public improvement. So what we proposed in our adjustment request was what we thought was a reasonable compromise, and that was a full street widening, dedication, and expansion and sidewalk on the collector street, which was what we understood to be the city's priority, which is Swan on the east side of the site, and then a widening of Hunter on the west side of the site. I'll also point out that the standard for streets and sidewalks says in it specifically that the community development director may waive this requirement if there are alternative provisions in the area, or he deems it necessary. I don't have the exact language in front of me. So we took advantage of that and made a request that we thought and still think is a reasonable compromise. So we'll just leave that out there. And then the second issue is something that's also pretty important to the applicant, is the parking lot landscaping issue, and specifically the issue of interior parking lot landscaping. Now, the parking lot we're talking about is this one here. So the one directly in front of the operations building. That is a parking lot, but I'll let also John talk about it in a little bit more detail. It's also a truck maneuvering area. That is where trucks will come on and off of the site to deliver materials. And to be able to do that, they need to have large turning radius areas and clear areas for them to maneuver around that. And to have a requirement for us to install concrete islands in the middle of that really impinges the ability for the site to function correctly. So that's the reason that we requested the adjustment. And that request, which is page 13 of my February submittal, kind of lays out why we thought it was reasonable for us to request that. And the intent of that regulation is for improvement of water quality, reduce stormwater runoff, and provide pavement shade. I pointed out that it would disrupt maneuvering. This paved area is quite small. There's substantial landscaping around the site as well, both for stormwater purposes and aesthetic reasons, and that we're not proposing any expansion of the parking area. And in this case, as in with the fence cases, what we're basically asking for is to leave things alone. These adjustments aren't for us to do major new expansions of, the fence, for example, or this parking area, but it's basically just to leave the conditions as they are so the site can continue to operate the way it has for a while. John, did you want to add anything else about the parking lot
issue?
Well, I think it's just important to note, hope that's, I've been dealing with a sore throat, forgive me. I think it's important to note that our trucks come in, our deliveries of trucks, for instance, we take salt in bulk, it's 25 tons at a time. That makes it the most cost efficient. Alum, which is used as a coagulant, is brought in at 4,500 or 4,500 gallon loads. So they are full tractor trailer semis that are coming onto the property. And if you'll look over here, they need this area for a turning radius to come around inside the building. And occasionally a very experienced trucker can actually bring the truck in backwards into this area, but he still needs this entire area if we want to use this part of the loading dock. This is our loading dock for shipping and receiving. So anytime you have full tractor trailers, this was originally designed to have a little more space. In 1976, they built this clear well, and that actually took some of the parking lot away. So we have a constant deal. This is a pretty busy day. I can see 5, 6, 7, 8 vehicles, 9 vehicles, 3 of them being Southwark stationary vehicles. But we juggle these cars daily when there's, depending on our needs for the parking lot. And just putting in any obstruction inside that small area for a tractor trailer would be, it just won't work. It's not practical. We can take our chemicals in smaller loads and smaller volumes, but the price goes up significantly. Currently, our budget for chemicals are $135,000 a year. If we were to bring things in smaller loads and smaller trucks, that price can double or triple. And I just couldn't see supporting that for our cost efficient business. So we would be willing to do whatever you'd like us to do, but to put physical barriers in small parking lots that already are accommodating tractor trailer rigs just isn't going to work. That's pretty much.
So yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just realizing I gestured at the wrong lot.
Right.
So we're talking about this one.
Correct.
Over on that side. So again, I think being able to accommodate striping is not a problem, and landscaping on the perimeter of that lot likewise not a problem. But it's really the interior parking lot landscaping that we requested is a significant issue for the site. So the other issue is that came up at the previous hearing is the commissioners wanted a better sense of sort of a street level view of what some of these new structures might look like. So we had not prepared that, but in the short time between that hearing and this hearing, we've had our engineers generate some new slides that combine photographs of the site with basically kind of what you described to us as just very schematic models of the sort of location and bulk, for a better word, of those structures. So I'll let.
Excuse me, Ben. Before we say that,
Sure.
Is this the right time to talk about the fence?
Sure.
I don't mean to jump in front
Yeah,
of
go
you.
ahead.
I'd just like to explain. I've been there since. For my first visit to Southwark was December of 1984. Went to work full-time February 1st, 1985. The fences have been there since I've been there, and they were older fences. Believe me, I used to be the kid that did the maintenance on them. But, we talked about razor wire. There isn't any razor wire. They're 6 feet high. They have a 40-degree pitch, and there's 3 additional strands of barbed wire, small barbed wire. And so just wanted to make sure that you realized it wasn't razor wire. Also, the question was asked about security or homeland security. Southwark, as with every major infrastructure that addressed public health, had to do a risk and vulnerability assessment. I wish I could bring that assessment to you and show you or submit it as evidence. We can't do that. It's kept under lock and key. We actually physically had to buy a safe on our property to put it in. Our board members are privy to that, but it addressed issues under Homeland Security and the Patriot Act on how we must maintain a safe and a reasonable effort to keep people away from that water treatment facility or the ability to enter it or cause damage or harm to us. So that fence is very critical for our facility. And one could make the case that it's under federal law as well for us to be there.
Okay, so why don't I let Pete run through the new slides, and then we'll open ourselves up for any questions you'd have about any of these issues.
Thanks, Ben. So I've just attached some recent work that we've done to the slideshow that we presented 2 weeks ago. And I won't really stop to go through the photos and graphics we showed you before, but what we did was we asked the plant staff to take some photographs around the perimeter of the property, and
Can you move it up a little bit?
one of you, yeah, we haven't finished.
Yeah. Yeah, can we get rid of the stuff on the top, Laura?
Where's the full screen button?
Go up to the top where it says slideshow, and then from current slide.
There we go.
Okay. So the staff took photographs last week, and we did some quick renderings, non-architectural renderings, engineering renderings. I want to make that clear. That's where none of the no architects worked on this. So
So in other words, somebody drew a square, and then you inserted the square in the picture.
yeah, maybe with a little illumination. So this first graphic is a photograph facing where the proposed new solids handling building will be. It's going to be set back from the property. So this is looking east from Hunter, and this gray shaded area.
Now, are you standing in the public right-of-way taking this, or?
I don't
Correct.
know.
Okay,
We're
perfect.
actually,
Perfect.
Commissioner, we're on the other side of the street. So
Okay.
we're using a 28 millimeter wide angle
You
lens.
can see the street right at
Yeah, I just assumed that they were either standing adjacent to the property or they were using Zoom, because it's pretty close, so.
Yep, so this is the one building that's fairly set back away from the fence line, so it's not very visible from this angle.
Okay. I just want to pipe up too, is what's in the foreground is the new clear well that was approved in 2007, and then that, you can see it's winter, but still the landscaping is starting to come in that we proposed and installed as part of that process between the
Can you
clear
use
well
the
and the
arrows
fence.
to, can you use the, yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Sure.
So is this a powder-coated fence?
No.
It is not. It's
That's
the
just
existing fence.
Regular chain link.
Yeah, that's,
So the lane, where you just put the arrow is where I can see the little brown bush
sure, that's a
thing?
berm with bark
Okay.
dust and trees.
They look like brown bushes, I can tell.
Over time, they'll
Okay.
probably develop further.
They will.
Right. Okay. So the next view is a little bit further to the north along Hunter. This is facing the main operations building here, and the filter building as it currently exists stops right about here. And what we've done is just extend the filter building by whatever it's required to add these two proposed new filters here. So from this perspective, you're just going to see an extension of the building and the walls compared to what it currently looks like. This is what's been
That's the communications
Right.
tower.
So we moved that along with it, too.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, any questions there?
Can you point out, since this is obviously the parking lot, is the loading bay visible here?
It is not. It's on the, if you see the big white tank, it would be on the other side of the white tank. So the truck would come in, and then he would back into that loading dock. The majority of our chemicals aren't loaded off a dock. They actually come in large trucks that look like milk trucks, essentially, and they come in with chemicals, and they plug into the backside of that building. So they come in, turn around in that limited round space, the bigger area there. They turn around in that space, pull up like they're going back out the gate, and then run a hose to either one of those tanks or a connection inside or next to the loading dock behind that white tank. That's where we receive our Allen. If we have need for physical delivery of something off that loading dock, then they'll truck him back up when we have a door. Also, we receive chemicals in 250-gallon totes, and they come in, move their truck around, then we come out with a forklift and pick them up and take them to the loading dock, physically to the dock.
Yeah, basically the loading dock is behind that power distribution panel, that gray square.
Oh.
Well, you wouldn't, even if that,
Right here?
Commissioner, even if that was gone, you would, it actually,
Right, but
the
I mean,
concrete
that's
slab
the
the tank sits
location
on
of it.
covers it, yeah.
That's why you can't see it.
So this is the most challenging building that we had to come up with. What we tried to do here, this is the chemical building, looking from Thurman at a little bit of an angle, and we've tried to recreate what the fence will look like in the future, because the way we created this drawing, we were kind of obliterating the fence that exists there now, but we're not proposing to change the fence. We're just trying to show you what it will look like with some new landscaping behind it, behind the fence, and then this new 2-story, 1.5-story building behind it. And we tried to superimpose it so someone looking from this direction could get a picture of what they'd be looking at.
Again, is this adjacent to the right-of-way?
Excuse me?
Adjacent to the right-of-way?
This is on the sidewalk.
Sidewalk.
We're standing
Okay.
on Thurman looking south.
Yeah.
So just a point of clarification, as it stands, your proposal is not moving any of the fences?
That's correct. All the adjustments are just to allow the fence to stay as it is. And the issue with the black fencing would be if the fence were to be removed or collapse in a storm or something like that, that we would be allowed to replace it and not have to replace it with a 3.5-foot high fence, which wouldn't serve the security purpose. And then the material would change.
So with respect to the question that was asked earlier, what's the relationship of the fence to the new proposed sidewalk? Is the sidewalk directly adjacent to the fence?
I would think so.
Yes. If we're required to build the sidewalk on Thurman, which we'd rather not be, then the thinking was, I don't think it had ever been raised until this hearing, would be that the fence would be on the property line, which would be adjacent to the sidewalk, unless the city's public works standards have some sort of buffer between the inside edge of the sidewalk and the property line. But if not, then we would do what any other property owner would do and put our fence on the property line.
There's no dedication proposed on Thurman, so.
And honestly, I don't think we're certain that fence, where that fence is in relation to our property line now. So it's been there for 50 or 60 years.
Just have one more question about the fence. Sorry to keep beating a dead horse.
It's fine.
If you guys are going to replace the fence, are you going to replace like part of the fence with a black fence, or when you guys decide to replace some of the fence, are you going to replace all the fence so that we have one uniform color?
It was our understanding that when we replaced portions of the fence, that we'd replace it with either the black powder coated or the
Black vinyl.
black vinyl coated fence. It wasn't our intention. That's I'm just ballparking, but that's $100,000 or $200,000 worth of fence around.
And
my
I think
property.
you'd want to have at least a replacement of one fence uniform color on a side, so that you don't have black fence and then galvanized fence. And
The issue I could see there, and
Yeah.
please forgive me if I'm not getting this, but we had a truck knock down in the corner of our fence. We had to replace 2 small sections of it. Now, it happened right on the corner, so that'd have been the section all the way through Hunter and all the way through Thurman.
Right.
So that would, our insurance company wouldn't allow us to claim replacing the entire fence, so then the burden would be
right.
to replace the
Well,
entire fence on both frontages.
I would just think that if you were thinking of replacing your fence and it was deteriorating to a point where you guys were going to make the decision to replace the entire fence, you'd want to replace it with one color instead of having a 2 different colored fence. That's just me. If you're doing a fairly large scale proposal here,
Long frontages.
I would think that you'd want to give the neighborhood a uniform fence design, or at least a uniform fence design on one side of the lot at a time, if you were financially pressed.
I don't think our proposal says we're planning on replacing the fence unless it's necessary for some other reason. I don't think
Right.
that's what we're proposing, so.
Next.
Just for clarification, is it staff's recommendation that they do replace the fence with black vinyl or powder coating?
It's when.
When?
They had proposed that as mitigation. for a higher quality material.
But only,
and it would be sections
only
at a
upon
time.
replacement section. Replacing sections at a
That's
time.
correct.
Okay.
We won't go out, next week if this is approved and make replacements on all 3 frontages. But for example, if there is a big improvement, public improvement that occurs on any of the frontages as a result of this approval, and the fence has to be replaced anyway, then it would be with a different material.
Okay. Thank you.
And so the improvements from the center line of the road, to put in the curb, the planting strip, the sidewalk, okay, I think there's actually a chart in the submittal that you gave us last time. It's actually a city street design standards typical section. Have you measured from the center line the required distance or the city's suggested distance to find out where the fence lies with respect to that measurement? Does that make sense? Do you follow what I'm saying?
Sorry, I don't. We haven't surveyed in the fence as far as I'm aware. So the short answer is we don't know exactly what the relationship is.
It seems to me it could be difficult for us to make some decisions about, do we have all the information that we need to have in order to make a decision about what this fence actually looks like with respect to this concept plan, this master plan?
It's unknown if you require the improvements, if that will require replacement of the fence along Thurman. Is that, or around any frontage.
I mean, if the measurement from the center line of the road,
We know what the measurement of the center line is and how much dedication would be needed for the improvements. We just don't know where the location of the fence is in relationship. So it's unknown whether
Okay.
the fence would have to be replaced
okay.
as required.
So
for-
depending on what that survey turned up, the fence may or may not be in the way. So we have everything we need to know.
Yeah, and
Okay.
also, it's important to know that the improvements are over a 20-year plan, so
Right.
they have 20 years
Yep.
to phase them in
Right.
if they want to.
Okay. Okay, so I'm clear about how this fence looks,
Yeah.
I think, in this plan. Other questions from the commission?
Were there
But
more
we have
pictures? Yeah.
at least
One more view.
Okay.
You want to
Okay,
just,
sorry,
Should be the rest of the chemical buildings.
I turned it back.
so this is the look from Swan, looking back towards the treatment plant with this new ozone contact basin, which is basically a concrete enclosed water retaining structure with no superstructure on top of it. So basically, you'd see the back of this wall with some landscaping in front of it in this view. We've tried to superimpose a fence on this because otherwise the existing fence wouldn't be seen from it. But we're not proposing to replace the fence this time.
And I guess I'll just point out that the landscape standard that we've proposed is substantially more complex and lush than this, but it's just a schematic portrayal that there will be some plantings between the fence and the structure.
Okay, thank you very much.
And actually, I wanted to respond just to the landscaping requirement. We already talked about the street improvement part. But so the interior parking lot landscaping requirement says that 15% of the interior of the parking lot should be landscaped. And it also says if you have cars parked in a row, every so often there should be a landscape between the two between car spaces. So they may be able to not put any landscaping where they are doing any truck maneuvering anyway because the parking lot is so big. And they also proposed on the north side of the parking lot an addition. The parking lot right now is just basically a paved swath. So they proposed to extend it, I think, 7,000 square feet or something in the north part. So they may meet parking lot landscaping standards and be able to get the mobility that they're looking for. I mean, all
This
other
is a
parking lots do.
detail that can come out in the detailed design phase as well, correct?
But it does seem as though there may be the opportunity to meet compliance with the Oregon City Municipal Code and still get that mobility that they were talking about as well. A lot of our sites, industrial sites, actually, all new ones will meet this standard and be subject to compliance with this as well. Same as shopping centers with big trucks and things like that.
Okay, thank you.
can we ask some additional questions?
We're going to move on to other public testimony at this point.
What about asking them questions?
You want to ask additional questions at this point?
If I may.
Okay. Commissioner McGriff.
I just, Ben, I just have a question. In your submittal, you said that you have adequate parking. So tell me what that means.
Yeah.
Because that's open to,
Sure.
obviously, interpretation. So you said that you have 10 parking spaces that are used now by the employees and visitors. So I guess in your mind, what do you think, how many parking spaces are there? I mean, they're not marked, as I recall. They're just kind of there, and do people just sort of park randomly, or?
Yeah, I mean, of course, John can speak to this better than I can, but that was an approximation based on the number of kind of the square footage of parking area that's available. And it's just been functional and sufficient and not excessive for the time that they've used the facility. So that was just sort of based on these other codes that talk about how we'll basically, it's kind of a strangely, libertarian way of looking at parking is we'll just let the owner figure out what's right for them, and if it works, let them do it. So especially given that there's not a really spillover issue on this site, that's what we proposed.
Well, it seems to me that something that would help is if there is a specific location where you're telling the employees to park, because I guess the question I wrote down here was, is the parking lot currently adequate for maneuvering and turning, given that the trucks keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and maybe as part of the process you need to look at reconfiguring where the asphalt is, because I guess in my mind I'm not convinced that it is adequate. And because you want to get larger loads, maybe that's something that really needs to be looked at to figure out turning movements and radiuses and things. Yeah, I mean, all the stuff, we all know, so that you can get these trucks in. I don't have an issue with your argument about putting landscape islands, but I think I agree with Laura in the sense that she says that with everything else going on, you probably do have enough room to put some perimeter parking landscaping and things like that. And obviously I'm hoping that they're planning on striping this, or so that it is clearly delineated, so that if a truck comes in and somebody comes in and just puts their truck somewhere, that you're not having to go run after people and tell them, oh, you got to move your truck because a big truck's coming in. That the employees they're supposed to be over here, and this is for truck maneuvering and loading, and so to me it seems it needs to be delineated out. So I don't know if you do have adequate turning radiuses and maneuvering, because again, my last recollection of that parking lot, as you said, it's just some asphalt kind of out there. So maybe that's something that needs to really be looked at, because it is an issue.
Right. I guess the couple things is, and I think John could also speak to this better than I can, but I think that just experientially, what we've got works. And the request is basically to ask that with the improvements of additional landscaping around the edges and striping, to let that be in terms of that's sufficient space for the kind of trucks that they're using now and that presumably they'll be using in the future. But to analyze that in greater detail, I think makes sense for the South Fork Water Board to do for its own benefit going forward.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
So the other thing I just wanted to ask is that I know that there are a number of parcels there. Now, I know that, is there any requirement, because you're building over, are you going to be building over property lines, that the parcels would be consolidated so it's one parcel? I know that there are setbacks from property lines, and if you've got 3 different parcels, how is that going to affect this master plan?
Yeah, Laura thought of that for us.
Oh, good. Okay, well, Laura, our brains are
she wanted to be
thinking
sure
the
we
same.
weren't needing to have a setback that goes down the center of one of our new buildings. So we contacted Clackamas County Assessor's Office and determined that a tax lot line that runs through the middle of the site is in fact only a tax lot line and not a parcel boundary, because it happens to fall on a section line, just that the surveyors laid out. And there was, I don't know if they'd made this decision all at once or did it when they laid out the section lines, but they just created tax lot lines wherever there happened to be a section line. But there was never any partition or subdivision process to create that as an actual parcel boundary, so that for the purpose of setbacks or building on top of it, it happens to be 2 tax lots owned by the same owner, but it shouldn't be an issue, according to Clackamas
Are
County.
they legally deeded lots?
So it's still just one property with just 2
lots.
tax lots over it. So one building lot still, just 2 tax lots on top of that single building lot.
They're taxing lots for taxing purposes. They're not tax lots for.
And then I guess the other, since I guess I have to throw in my 2 cents about the fence. I support the staff's recommendation, but I don't support the recommendation for vinyl. Unfortunately, vinyl over time, as we all know, gets exposure to UV rays, and the stuff starts falling off. And I would much prefer that if the fence was ever going to be replaced, that it be powder coated, because that has that's sealed in, that's heated, it's treated, and it's going to stay on there, and people can't. Not that people would, but there are some vinyl coated fences around the neighborhood, and 15 years, 10 years down the road, they're just starting to deteriorate, and it doesn't look attractive at all. And you got little pieces of vinyl peeling off that, small children and adults just like to pull off. So I would just recommend we not even go there with that.
Other questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Maybe.
Yes. First, I'd like to thank you for the photos. The big concern I had was that the people residing on Thurman, because they're basically right there, all the other lots are kind of set back and kind of almost farmy, but would they be suddenly looking at like a 50-foot wall in front of them because of the way the building was? And it appears from these drawings that, between the slope of the land and the fact that you've got the water tanks and the actual master building, that you're not impacting their view. I mean, you've moved the view a little closer, but you're not changing their skyline, so to speak. So I really appreciate the effort that went through on that.
So you don't think that's
one. He's talking
Don
about.
Thurman? Okay, yeah, that's still a big space of.
Yeah,
building,
but they've
that's
still
okay.
got building. I mean, they're
Yeah.
still looking at the tanks
Yes.
and everything else, so
Yeah.
it's not really changing things.
Yeah.
In fact, it'll be nicer than the moss-covered cement tanks. That I see. Could you go back to the very first slide? Way back at the very beginning, the one that laid out the property. There we go. The area that's in blue leading up to the chemical buildings.
Right here?
Yeah. My understanding from reading the other documents, and unfortunately I'm a paper person, so I'm still learning this, is that that's going to be a paved area? Because that's... So, just looking at it, that looks like you're doubling your paved surface. And why is it being paved? Is it being paved so that trucks can maneuver up to the chemical storage building, which means they won't need to be maneuvering in the other parking lot area?
Chemicals, but deliveries of equipment, for instance, recently parts for our rectifier have to come in on a semi-truck, and they back up to that delivery dock, which will still be present and functional.
How often do parts come in for rectifiers?
Well,
How often do you get a semi of just parts versus chemicals?
once or twice a year.
And you have a forklift.
Yeah, it
Correct.
seems to me
So
that we
you
do
could
that.
compensate for the lost territory by pulling the truck into the truck area next to the
If I would agree with that, if, once the design work's done, that you can show me where a semi can turn around there and be able to maneuver through there, that may be justifiable then.
Okay, so you're saying that there might be a way to work out that in parking area planters could fit once you get to a final design.
It's our job to be here and be good neighbors and be compliant. When we built the reservoir, we put 3 times the amount of trees down required by the city.
Yeah, you guys have done a
And we
wonderful
are
job.
continuing to work with you.
But-
It just seems to me that you're asking us, we're never going to change the fact that we're an industrial application.
Right.
We were built there in 1957, went online in 1958, with the exception of one home. The neighbors choose to come live by us and be by us, and we want to maintain our good status. But a commercial area that receives trucks needs space and not restrictions. So under that premise, here's another example. You see figure F where the 2 filters are. I guess those are both Fs. those will be coming in, and there will be cranes once every 5 to 8 years. Cranes will have to come in and remove the media, vacuum trucks, and bring in super sacks and crane in things there. You need the ability to get vehicles and machinery and equipment in and around those areas. So
Seems to me that this is a problem then.
Well, and I understand that, but based on using these cars in the picture as a scale and the amount of blue that you've added, that a couple of islands would be possible. So based on that, I'm not necessarily leaning towards letting you have the vacation of the island concern. When final designs come in and you show that, look, we've started to lay, we've surveyed it and we've laid this down and this is the way it is, and we need a non-conforming use or a variance at this point to not put islands down, but we're going to compensate by putting more trees on the perimeter. Great, but at this point, I'm not sure I accept your argument for no islands in the parking area.
I respectfully disagree with you.
And that's fine. And I respectfully disagree with you.
Okay, other questions from the commission?
I've got one small one. You guys are expanding, maintaining the use, any additional employees?
None. In fact, the reality is water treatment over time is using automation and will actually either maintain or reduce employees.
Okay.
I have a question of process or procedure. The conditional use that we're considering tonight is because there is a master plan that has come before us, or if there's going to be significant work done, then we have to reconfirm the conditional use. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
Because they're increasing the capacity of the site and the intensity of the
Adding
site.
$40 million in upgrades over 20 years.
So we just want to make sure that it's appropriate within the neighborhood and that we mitigate all the
Okay.
impacts.
And that every time they come in, they don't have to ask for variance on the fences.
Yeah, so they won't need if they stay within this development and they come back for their detailed development plans, those will be processed as type 2, limited discretion, and clear and objective standards, and they won't need it.
Commissioner Mabey, one more chance for questions.
I got 1,000. No, So the two areas, just to clarify, the two areas that we're in disagreement with, and by we meaning staff and you, is whether or not you need to do some islands in the parking lot, just to use a generic term, and whether or not you have to do basically Thurman and Hunter Street improvements, or is it just Thurman?
No, it's both. It's staff has proposed full street sidewalk planting strip widening, dedication on all, well, I guess not dedication on Thurman, but on all three frontages, and we have proposed that only on Swan and a widening on Hunter. So that's correct. We're in disagreement on those issues.
Okay.
It's also perimeter parking lot landscaping as well, as interior.
But I think what I pretty much heard is that they said they'll do perimeter stuff. Their main concern is that there's an island that could interfere with
That's correct.
industrial. So
But we don't know that yet.
yeah, why?
Commissioner McGriff.
With all due respect, as someone who lives in a residentially zoned neighborhood where there is a public facility in it, I'm not totally sure that the argument of we were there first and now everybody else comes in. I do agree with you in the sense that South Fork has been a good neighbor, and I know of the development of the site because it was in the county. The county standards were much different than the city standards, but it's been in the city since the emergency annexation, and I think it's that the 20-year time frame is not an unreasonable time frame to take care of some of the issues that will make it a better and more attractive and more productive neighbor in the neighborhood. And I think that the lack of participation by the public here, to me, does not negate that. We need to do whatever we can to improve that. And I understand some of that might come out with, a little bit higher utility bills, heaven forbid that I would say that, but I think our rates are very reasonable now. And I think that some of the things we don't have the answers to, and I would like to see some of these things, as Damon pointed out, played out before we say, no, we can't do it. You don't have the answer unless South Fork is willing to step up to the plate now to do the work that says, here's why we can't do these things. Then I think that we need to say, yes, we are going to ask you to do these until you can show us, as Damon pointed out, that it can't be done. But we need solid information. I think we need really on-the-ground layouts, such as, again, possibly a survey, so we know where all this stuff is. I'm not super in favor of having a lot more paving anywhere because, again, we need that groundwater to be going into the ground and not on surfaces. And maybe there's something you can do with permeable pavement for truck turning around, but we don't have that laid out now. So I think I'm in total in agreement with you, Damon, on that particular.
Is there a question?
No, that was a statement.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions from the commission?
I think we're good.
Okay. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Is there any public comment for or against, or neither for or against the applicant's proposal? Seeing none, I think, do I close the hearing or do I ask for a motion to close the hearing?
You might, I'm sorry, they just sat down, but do you have any final rebuttal?
Yeah, final rebuttal, I guess, for the applicant.
We heard it. I have what John has.
I guess just to beat the interior parking lot landscaping issue down into a pulp, we still feel like that it's a reasonable request to waive that requirement, but given what Laura's talked about, and at least a 10% requirements, I'm just looking at that specific regulation in 1752.
Oh, no.
Yeah, D. Interior parking lot landscaping shall have a minimum of 10% of the interior of the gross area of the parking lot. If it's possible for us to design our way around that, which is one of the things that you suggested, and still be able to achieve this maneuvering, but if it's not, because that would be a change to the master plan, we'd be back here to ask for an adjustment again. And if it were possible to modify that process, to have the adjustment go through a type 2 process, that would probably save time and hassle for the applicant going forward. But so then the options would be either we can, well, our most preferred option is we think it's reasonable to waive that requirement in this forum. But if not, then to either design our way out of it on a clear and objective way or request an adjustment without having to come back to the Planning Commission for such a narrow issue. I don't know if that's entirely clear, but do you see what I'm getting at? Mm-hmm. Part of the point of requesting these adjustments is so that we wouldn't have to, both pay the fee and return here at each detailed development phase to ask for things that everybody thinks is a fine idea. So
basically what you're saying is if in 10 years you get ready to do the parking lot work and you show that trucks just can't do it with an island in there, and you want to come back and say, look, we didn't do it, but we added more trees on the perimeter, is that an acceptable standard? You'd like the staff to be able to answer that question and not have to come all the way back to us.
Which would be appealable to you if
Right.
someone disagreed, public notice, opportunity to appeal. It could certainly come back here if someone felt strongly about it, but not as a matter of course for us to come in for a 10-minute hearing where, oh yeah, I remember and that's fine.
Yeah.
So that's
Then you can appeal.
that's just an option that I'd like to consider if, in fact, you do what we'd rather you not do, which would be to not waive that interior parking lot requirement. So I'll just put those out there as choices for the commission to consider.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So at this point, we'll close the public hearing. And I think we do have the question for staff, I think, that the applicant has just raised, is the proposal that he made, putting a condition on the parking landscape such that for example, the community development director could approve a design in the detailed development or detailed design phase. I guess is that something that we could even consider to adjust that or to make a condition of approval?
If, when they come in, they need to turn in some type of a interior circulation and turning movement study. And if they're going to, and if they can demonstrate that there's no place in that parking lot that they can put an interior parking island.
Yeah, you'll have that reviewed
That
by
can
your
be reviewed as a
by your
type 2
traffic
decision.
engineer.
Give me the latitude to review in conjunction with a turning movement.
That'd
Parking
be
lot
the only
study.
way I'd be comfortable with it,
And
because
then that's at least appealable, and I have something to look
Yeah.
at to make that
yeah,
decision.
and you can say yes based on the standards and the uniform traffic code. Here's how this truck is going to turn. I mean, part of the problem with that, the only thing I see as a problem with it is that you'd have to determine what truck standard we're going to use, because there's a whole bunch of is it WB40 or is it this or that?
And
or,
that we have our traffic engineer
yeah, exactly.
that would work
Yeah.
with there.
That'd be the only
what's
way
reasonable.
I'd be comfortable with it.
I have a question for Ms. Richter.
Yes.
We had talked before, I think at the training that you gave us, about how we would handle conditions of approval that came up during these meetings. Do you have a suggestion for how we might deal with this point?
Well, you could either give us a 5-minute break and we could draft something quick, if that's where you're headed. It sounds to me like what Tony is proposing is we will identify the standards now, so there won't be discretion later. And so there won't be a need for an adjustment later, because we're going to identify the standards under which we're not going to require islands later. So if you wanted to, we could take a 5-minute break and we could huddle and talk about that. If you think there's going to be 15 of these, you could continue the hearing, close the public hearing now, make a tentative decision, and staff could come back with a revised decision at the next meeting.
I guess I'd like to get an idea of how many,
Yeah.
how close are we, or are we way off?
Yeah, we don't-
I know we had the question about the powder coating fence, if we
Right.
agree with Ms.
Correct.
Commissioner McGriff. We have this turning parking lot issue. I'm not sure if there are more issues out there.
Let's-
Conditions that we need to.
Let's tag this issue and continue our discussion and move forward. Shel, I would suggest to the commissioners that we walk through these adjustments one by one and have a discussion or find out whether or not there is a consensus to move forward. Is that
Did you close the public hearing?
Yes.
All right, sorry, I wasn't listening.
the public hearing is closed? And so, shall we, I think what I'd like to do is frame this as a question on whether or not the commission agrees with the staff's finding and recommendation with regards to each of these adjustments. So let's begin with the fence height, and I'll start with Zach.
I have no problem with proposed fence height.
We're just talking about fence height or material.
Hi.
This is
Number one is fence
This
height.
is number one, right?
If you go to the PowerPoint presentation, starts at slide 8, is the breakdown of the.
Document.
It's really nice being able to pull these up.
I could run through the list too if you want to real quick.
Could you put your slide, I think you had,
You want from up here?
yeah, please, thank you.
At least, yeah, so the public can understand what we're going through too, I guess.
So what page are we
Are
looking
we
at?
going through?
Page 8 on the PowerPoint.
I'll bring it up for you. I'm not going through it. This is a fence. That's right.
Okay,
Let's
so-
just have one discussion here at the dais,
So,
please.
so with regard to the fence height, I have no objection to that condition.
I have no objection to the fence height.
None?
Nope.
Nope.
And neither do I. Next is the chain link adjustment. Zach?
I would prefer, as was previously stated, if they were done in, so there was continuity per side. If it was black, they were all black. But as for the choice of black vinyl or powder coating, either is fine.
Either is fine. Commissioner Tidwell?
I guess I would agree that the black vinyl is probably not as substantial in terms of long-term longevity as the powder coating. So I would suggest that the black vinyl is probably not an appropriate material for long-term maintenance. As far as the replacement, I would tend to, if there was a way that they could limit the replacement to the area that required replacement rather than the entire side, I'm not sure how that would be accomplished, but for example, if a tree fell on a section of fence and only damaged a 20-foot section of fence, I don't think that replacing the entire side of that property would be a reasonable thing to require.
Well, I think right now that's what the language says, is that as sections are replaced, not sides.
Sides, yeah.
So right now it allows incremental.
So I would agree with that. It's incremental.
Commissioner Aspey?
I have no comments on the fence.
I concur with powder coating over vinyl. I've just seen too many of them picked together, and sometimes the animals like the flavor and they start gnawing on them. I got
squirrels,
so it could conceivably end up being more of a problem to deal with the eyesore than just having a good product to begin with. I know it's more expensive, but
Commissioner McGriff?
I think it would be worth our, since it's our Southwick Water Board, our time and money to go with powder coated.
Commissioner
But I
Groner?
don't have an issue with a chain link. I think chain link is fine, and I like the fact that they have the barbed wire inward as opposed to concertina wire. So
I have no problem with the chain link either, and hadn't really considered the black vinyl coming off, but concur that could be an issue. But in terms of the replacement, I think the language as exists, that replace as needed and not a whole side at one time, is reasonable.
And I would like to make a suggestion for city staff, another item to put on your work plan, is to find us an alternative to the chain link for these types of institutional applications that require some type of security fencing, because I think the chain link is a little too institutional, and I think we deserve better than that. So I don't have a problem with the chain link in this instance, and it does sound to me like there is a consensus that we want to strike the word vinyl from the condition of approval and just keep the black powder coating. Is that
yeah, Commissioner
agreeable?
Stein, I think you'll find that utilizing a powder coated fence, it will look attractive and it'll look nicer. I mean, even a brand new chain link fence looks good.
Yes, I understand, and I've
yeah.
seen the black powder coated fences around the water detention
Yeah,
reservoirs
right.
around the city, and it does look good. And I'm just thinking of other types of barriers with a nicer aesthetic. I mean, it's just an aesthetic thing. Chain link versus some kind of a.
So they have woven wire, but that's pretty expensive.
And
Chain
they have
link is
razor
cheaper.
wire, too. But I think if you look at the open reservoirs in the city of Portland, they've done better than chain link fences.
You're talking about
to
like
protect those.
like maybe a wrought iron.
Correct.
Yeah,
Wrought iron,
yeah.
something
Those
like
are
that.
those are definitely spendy,
I understand.
but it is an option.
Just real quick on
With
the
spikes
last
on the
slide, it's powder coated, not power coated.
Coated, yeah. Power coated.
Well, I mean,
Let's move
somebody
to
might see that
adjustment
and
number
think it's
3,
electrical.
pedestrian access, please. Zach?
I have no comment.
Commissioner Kidwell?
I think this is acceptable as proposed.
Commissioner Aspey?
requiring sidewalks on all four sides of the
that's-
development.
No, this is interior.
Okay, interior? Okay. Yeah, I don't think that interior sidewalks are necessary, and I'll save my discussion for the perimeter sidewalks.
I concur with the recommendations.
I as well.
As do I.
As do I. Number 4, the parking lot landscaping.
I've driven trucks, I've driven trailers, I've backed them up, and because of that, I would not want islands in a parking lot that's going to be seeing regular deliveries or regular maintenance.
Can I interrupt our discussion here? Because we did have this discussion,
yeah.
and we do have an outstanding condition of approval, I think, that we might want to work on later. So are there, the condition of approval that we had formulated and outlined, are there other issues that have not been discussed regarding the parking lot landscape that we need to discuss outside of that additional condition of approval?
The island question.
Well, it is an island and perimeter.
The idea was that the applicant could put together a traffic study or an internal circulation study of the site so that the community development director could make a decision subsequent to this hearing if we approved this specific condition of approval. Is that correct?
Well, in my opinion, it was only, to me, it spoke specifically to the interior parking lot landscaping, but I still want to make sure that there's going to be perimeter landscaping. I think they need to do the truck turning movement study and see how that relates to whether or not they can do islands. Again, I don't think what Laura said, they may be able to put that in the employee parking area as opposed to where the trucks are going to go. Hopefully those things are going to be separated and they're not going to be commingled. So I don't have any issue with us adding this additional, revising the condition, but I want to make sure that, again, it's based on, as Carrie said, a clear and objective standard, that there needs to be this turning study. But again, I think they still have an option to put some interior landscaping in where the areas of the employees are going to be. I'm not supporting of it in where the trucks are going to be, but we don't know where that is, and I don't think we can just totally mitigate this because there is no mitigation and the applicants don't know.
Okay.
So I'd like to leave it a little bit open,
Okay.
the way we had talked about.
Okay. Ms. Richter, are you working on language for an additional
I'm
condition
trying to
of
think it
approval?
through.
Okay, we'll move forward. We'll move on with the design standards, adjustment number 5. Zach?
I agree with the language as is.
Commissioner Tidwell?
Yes, I agree with the language as stated.
I also agree.
Yep.
I just have one question. What's wall articulation? Articulate means move. So what walls move?
Articulation in
The
architectural terms
term.
means that it has steps in it.
Okay.
It's not physically moving back and forth.
Okay.
It's
It's
just,
just
it
All
has
right.
It's the
steps.
articulation of the particular
Visual-
side.
visual
articulation, yes.
Okay. With that, I have
Means
no
you
problem.
don't have a flat wall
Right.
Yeah.
200 feet long.
So they're not just looking at some
It
sort
makes
of...
it hard to paint a mural on an articulated wall. Yeah, I have no problem with the language. I think it's fine. The staff recommendation. Fine.
Commissioner
Fine.
Groner? It's fine by me. Finally, the sidewalk and street improvements. Zach, discussion?
So far, I'm currently siding with what the city is leaning towards. I kind of like the idea of having sidewalks all the way around, and it seems like if we're going to disregard Thurman, I mean, that's pretty much, in my opinion, the ones that would need it the most. I mean, those are the houses that are most established there now, and we're giving a whole lot of attention to Swan and not them. So I would like to still leave that on the table.
Okay. Commissioner Tidwell?
I would tend to favor the applicant's proposal as they have proposed the street and sidewalk development.
Can I propose a compromise position? Rather than having sidewalks around all 4 or 3 corners of the site, looking at maybe the possibility of having a meandering asphalt pathway that wouldn't necessarily follow specific sidewalk standards, but rather have something a little bit more congruous to the area as opposed to a 6-foot cement sidewalk.
I agree with the staff on the Swan and Hunter side, but I agree with the applicant on the Thurman side. I think, looking at the purpose of the regulations, safe, continuous, efficient transportation for pedestrians, bicyclists, automobiles. Pedestrians can walk up the Hunter sidewalk and cross the crosswalk to the houses in front of Thurman and use that sidewalk there. There would be basically no purpose for them to be walking along the side of the treatment plant. And as a safety concern, the further away you keep people from, high security areas, the better it is. And having them cross the street, they can see everything they need to see on the other side of the street if they're looking at it. So my compromise would be to accept staff for Swan and Hunter and the applicant for Thurman. So just throw all sorts of stuff out there.
Sure. I concur with the staff recommendation, and I would recommend that it be denied, this particular number 6.
Commissioner Groner.
I think I'm in agreement with Commissioner Maybe that I don't necessarily see a need for the additional sidewalk just on Thurman, but certainly do for Hunter and Swan. I mean, I understand and heard the applicant's argument that it was a different type of area when they moved in. But that being said, we have plans and visions for this to be a more dense and a more city area than it was at that time. But I do think I agree with Commissioner Maybe that the Thurman sidewalk might not be needed as such, and may even be a security deterrent as well.
I'm myself am in agreement with the staff's findings and recommendation. I live in the area. I ride my bicycle around that space. I run around that space. I see a lot of development going on in that neighborhood, and the new developments are putting in the curbs, the sidewalks, the streets. And in my mind, if we have this institutional conditional use in the neighborhood, and it's not up to the standards that we're asking other developers to meet, I don't think we're doing justice to the neighbors in the neighborhood. It is a rural feel in that area because the lots are large. And because the lots are large, there's an opportunity that they're going to be divided. And when they're divided, there's going to be development. And when that development happens, I would hate to have a mishmash of some developments with sidewalks, other developments without sidewalks. Turning to Commissioner Espy's proposal of a meandering path, I like that idea, but I only like it if we can move the perimeter fencing back so that that's a meaningful meandering pathway. A meaningful meandering pathway that has articulation in elevation as well as in contours, turning contours, but also groomed with landscape, so that it's not just a blacktop path. So that's my take on the adjustment number 6. So we're also asked to consider, I believe, community development directors' ability to approve the barbed wire fencing.
City manager.
The city manager's approval
Actually,
of the barbed
I was going to
wire
ask a
fencing.
clarifying question. Is it the city manager or is it?
It's the city manager. It's always been the city
City
manager.
manager.
Interesting.
Okay.
Even when I worked here, it was the city manager. They don't want to give Tony that kind of
That's fine, Zach, that's
a lot of
fine.
power.
doesn't want to
He doesn't want the barbed wire power.
Commissioner Tidwell,
On which question?
we're talking
wire.
about the city manager approving the use of the barbed wire.
I have no objection. I had
Get back
assumed
to
it
the
would be
back
the
end.
development director.
I did too.
Seems more appropriate.
That's an old one. Yeah.
Barbed wire is kind of a liability issue, and I don't think the community development director wants that responsibility. That's why it's purely in the seat of the city manager, because when everything else happens, the buck stops there.
Well, just a comment. Frankly, I'm surprised that if this plan has been approved by Homeland Security with only a 6-foot high fence, I've had experience with detention facilities, and there have been studies that show that a 12-foot fence with barbed wire can be
With an additional
sealed
2
in
foot of barbed wire.
23 seconds.
Yeah.
So I'm actually surprised that Homeland Security has, for a water treatment facility that serves how many thousands of people, they're okay with a 6-foot high fence.
Yeah, and I think if anybody's going to commit a crime, they're not going to check to see if there's a sidewalk there.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely
That
think
may
the
not be-
barbed wire approval needs to go forward.
I'm fine with the barbed wire.
Okay. And we had another question about the parking standard,
Parking, the number of stalls,
number of stalls. that-
which standard should we use?
To accept the
Yeah.
NA standard.
Are there any objections to this staff's recommendation on that?
No.
No.
Well, right now, is there enough parking for, because I'm assuming everybody that works there probably drives there. Is there enough parking for, do they work on a shift or everybody's there at the
Shift.
same time?
Shift basis.
So is there enough, I guess that's part of that parking lot study that they need to do with wrong with the turning
But that's
movements.
not our responsibility.
No, I'm saying that's,
their responsibility.
staff is going to check that out.
And I will say, I've been there when there's been over 40 people present for,
A meeting.
well, barbecues, basically, thank yous for all the volunteers and all that. And there hasn't been a parking issue. There's enough space with people being polite and a couple of parking a little wide on the driveways, but everybody fits, so there's definitely enough for the whole staff to park and still have visitors.
Ms. Richter, you've been thinking about the parking landscape
All right,
adjustment
here's what
number
we've
4
come up
for us?
with. And this relates to the interior parking that cannot be accommodated because of truck circulation. As part of the detailed design review, the applicant shall submit a truck circulation plan. And based on that plan, if interior parking lot landscaping cannot be accommodated, the applicant shall be required to locate the remaining 10% is the standard, 10% interior. The remaining 10% interior landscaping, which cannot be accommodated within the parking lot somewhere on the site. So in other words, if it turns out, based on the parking lot, the truck circulation area, that 100 square feet need to be landscaped interior, but they can't fit it there, they put it somewhere on the site.
I prefer it to be in the parking lot perimeter.
But the whole idea is that they only have so much square footage to drive the trucks around, and so we can't narrow that asphalt area.
No, I'm not saying in the asphalt area, but outside of the asphalt area, in that parking
So adjacent.
lot, adjacent to the parking area, not just someplace else.
They will be required to meet the perimeter landscaping standards.
Right, this wouldn't have any
So
effect
this
on
would
the
be
perimeter
above and
land.
beyond the perimeter landscaping.
This is interior.
Yeah,
And
I would say
So it would have
yes.
to, it would have to,
That's,
so in close proximity to the parking lot.
yes,
not-
that would be
okay.
that would be acceptable.
Commissioner Maybe.
I guess my problem with that is this is essentially a natural area. So to suddenly say, and you have to go and carve out of the nice little rural forest, you have 100 square foot manicured landscaped area. I mean, the stuff is either landscaped
I don't
or,
see it saying that.
well, but that's what her language says is if you can't put it in an isle, in
Yeah.
islands, then you have to locate it somewhere else on the property. The rest of the property is an urban forest.
Well, I'm assuming it's natural. They're going to use native plantings. They could put ferns for all I care. That could be the landscaping.
Well,
Well, I mean, or another option would be,
I think we're getting into way too much detail
Right,
on the
yeah.
planting plan. They will plant something that's appropriate with native species for the site.
I mean,
Let's
or
leave it at
they
that.
would not have to plant anything at all. You could say, as part of the detailed design review, the applicant shall submit a truck circulation plan, and based on that plan, if parking lot landscaping cannot be accommodated, or parking lot landscape shall be accommodated to the extent possible, or something along those lines, and you wouldn't have to put the replacement somewhere else. I wanted to get the total amount of landscaping that the standard requires there.
I think that's okay. I think, Damon, maybe you're taking quote-unquote landscaping too literally. I don't see them carving out areas to put all these little plants in a row so it looks manicured. I think that they're going to put landscaping in that's in keeping with their surrounding area. To me, that makes more sense. It seems logical. So anyway, I'm good with what you said, Karen.
Maybe blackberry bushes.
Well, no, that's an invasive species. They can't put that in.
Actually, there is a native blackberry.
Yes, we do have a native blackberry.
So we're talking
Himalayan
about
blackberry.
No, that's not native.
adding
That's
this as condition of approval number 22,
Correct.
and that would solve the issue with regards to parking landscape.
I do have one language thing, and that would be that they may submit. Because if they do the study and they say, well, we can put islands in, then there's no reason for them to make the expense of a traffic circulation thing.
Sure.
Basically, you take a truck template and
I
you
don't
lay
know,
it
I
out
understand
in their
that.
parking lot.
But I'm saying the way that initially it was, they had to do it even if they were going to put islands in. Now,
That's a good.
Sure. I agree.
I thought we were saying they would do it if they could not.
And that's what we get there by saying may instead of shall.
Other discussion from the commissioners?
no, I
No.
think we've just got number 6 to kind of hash over, because that's where we've got a variation at this point.
Yeah. Do we want to go back to discuss number 6 to try and get to
Yeah,
a
we don't have
consensus?
direction yet on
We have
the
three-
sidewalk or
Three
improvements for Swan,
supporting
Thurman,
the staff's
Hunter.
recommendation, and 2 people came up with alternatives.
And then there was one other. Is that right?
Yes, yeah.
Seemed like we didn't.
So,
have,
yeah,
we
we-
didn't have 4 on any one proposal.
But we're looking at either accepting the staff's recommendation to,
The applicants, the staffs, or some hybrid.
or some hybrid, so.
Well, I guess the first question would be for Commissioner Espy is, do you still want to keep your hybrid forward, or?
I do.
Okay, all right, that's fine.
Is that the meandering path?
Yeah.
Just a point of discussion, if we get into proposing a design alternative, then at the same time, we're also asking them to relocate that fence.
Yeah.
So
do that.
that's.
I think he's
that's-
wanting you to talk closer to the microphone.
Requiring them to put in a meandering sidewalk sounds like a great idea, but then we're also at the same time asking them to relocate several hundred feet of fence in doing that. So it's not then just a sidewalk issue. They would then have to upgrade the fence with the higher standard fence at the same time. So
Right.
It would be a significant cost impact to do that.
It sounds like the difference in cost would be the cost of putting in the full street improvement with the curbs, parking strips, sidewalks, and potentially moving the fence, or to do this other thing.
I was to understand that the staff recommendation would be moving the fence. I mean, if we were going to put in a full sidewalk and
No.
at Thurman.
I understood that we don't know because the survey's not been done.
Okay.
We're assuming, and they're assuming that the fence is on the property line, but I don't know if we can make that. I think we can make the little bit of the leap saying that the sidewalk would be in the public right-of-way, not on their property.
And I guess my concern with that is I don't see the room for a meandering path along Thurman there. I mean, not with where the proposed buildings are. I would be in support if it were feasible to an extent. I don't see the feasibility of a meandering path.
I think that the applicant's proposal talks about their buildings being a significant distance from the property line. They're well in excess of the
More than 20
the
feet.
requirements for the setbacks. So there is space.
There's a requirement that the height of the structure is at least that same distance away from the property line. So that'll be verified during the detailed development plan. And the structures along Thurman were 20 feet to the eaves, so they'll have to be at least that distance away as well.
See, then you can't jump over the fence and climb on a building.
Commissioner McGriff.
I don't have any issue with the setbacks or the buildings, and I guess we need to take a hands up or down if we support the meandering path so we can move on.
Yeah.
I think that's where we're at.
I think there's one person that supports it. I don't think the rest of us will
Well, I
support
think
it.
we all support the concept, but
It's
but
unrealistic.
don't recognize its current plan doesn't,
Call for that.
yeah. So,
So do you want a hands up or hands down, or?
Well, it appears that there's consensus against the meandering sidewalk and creative design, so
If
is
we
that
had
as
the
it may?
room, I'd go for it, but I don't think we have the room, Paul.
Yeah. I'll move on.
that leaves the maybe amendment or the staff proposal. So, and mine was that we accept staff on Hunter and Swan and the applicant on Thurman.
That's right, and I was in agreement. Largely, cost considerations was what I was thinking of. But I do have to say that your Chair Stein's argument carried some weight with me, and I guess I'm on the fence with the maybe. Sorry, Dave. With the maybe amendment, it's a maybe at this point for me.
For me, at the point of detailed development, if it turns out that because there's not enough space between the property line and the building, or there's some reason why you can't put in a sidewalk, maybe that's when they come back to the planning commission and they ask for that adjustment.
Well, and it wasn't. I mean, I don't think there'll
But
be.
I
a
don't think you
question.
give that up right away
Yeah.
on a 20-year concept plan.
No, and I think you won me over. I think I agree. It goes with the flavor of where we want to go in that neighborhood. So again, I apologize, Commissioner Maybe, but
that's fine.
that,
I mean, this is
I
what we
would-
do. We
I'm with
discuss
you
these
on that.
things, we come up with ideas, so.
So given that, we go with the staff recommendation for approval with the sidewalks on all three sides, and then if in the future the applicant feels that that's unrealistic, they can come back and ask for another adjustment.
That's true. Is that right, staff? I'm sorry. Ms. Turway?
I don't know. If
So they're gonna have 50 plus, a little over 50 feet of right of way. We can fit this half street improvement in there, in what we're asking for. So this shouldn't be an issue. We're assuming, making an assumption that the fence is relatively close to where the property line is. So there should be enough room to fit, because we're not even asking for the 5-foot planter strip in this case. So we're actually 5 foot short of the 50. We're utilizing 45 feet of right of way, assuming that road's in the right location. So if something's way off, yeah, we'll have to come back and address that somehow. But I have a feeling that we're pretty close, and we have enough right of way to work within to get this half street improvement in there.
And it's, 20
That was
years.
on Thurman.
Okay, well, I guess we have consensus.
I guess I don't want to muddle this up too much, but I've heard these conversations tonight, and appreciate trying to come up with an alternative street designs and where we should put sidewalks, where we should, and how we should design them. And a little nervous to put this out there, but I will.
We're there, Tony. We're going with staff recommendation.
Well, I know, but in hearing your conversations, I'm trying to, there may be some remedies, but I want it to be conditioned in such a way that we have the ability to work with the applicant and the city engineer to come up with maybe an alternative street design on these streets. So I heard kind of the concerns about the fence being right up against the back of the sidewalk. Now the question is, do we take the 5-foot planter strip and go with a curb-tight sidewalk? So then you have 5-foot planter strip behind.
That could work.
That could work. On Thurman, we have 16 foot of right-of-way, of pavement being on the applicant's side of the right-of-way. So we've got a travel lane and a parking lane. Do we really need a parking lane on the applicant's side? And we could give up that asphalt, and you could put additional landscaping in there.
Right.
Do you have that flexibility
That's where I'm
at this
headed.
point?
I'd like to work with the city engineer as well as the applicant. We haven't discussed this, but and I don't want to keep delaying this.
Do we need to make a condition of approval?
To allow me to come up with an
Yes.
alternative street design. It sounds like everyone was okay with what was conditioned. So that'll be the fallback condition. But I guess if we have the ability then to come up with an alternative street design that is less than that, that we would be able to. No guarantee that we will, but that we could look at it.
Ms. Richter?
It sounds to me like what we're proposing is the same total amount of improvements. It's just a question of where the sidewalk's going to go in that total space.
Correct.
And so it sounds like, to me, we could amend this, add a second sentence to item 3. Prior to issuance of detailed development plan phase 1, the applicant shall submit a phasing plan of the following improvements, which are incomplete, are to be completed prior to final of phase 3 detailed development plan. We could say the community development director may work with the applicant to relocate or even locate the improvements within the right-of-way identified.
Or explore
Yeah,
options.
that's
for
pretty close. Yeah, that works.
So it won't be anything more than what the condition is, but it could potentially be less and relocated.
Right.
And what I'm really looking at is on Hunter and on Thurman, the need for 16-foot, do we really need 8-foot parking lanes on their side of the half street?
We probably don't.
I agree.
That could open up some additional room to kind of address some of the concerns we've heard.
I mean, it's essentially a park and being able to enjoy the park rather than.
It's a park closed to people.
Sure. You can use the chain link.
It's closed space as
This
opposed
could
to
be something
open
that you can
space.
walk around, and it could be used as an amenity.
Yeah.
Instead of just having a straight sidewalk, you'd have, curved sidewalk with landscaping.
Oh, I agree.
And maybe that would give the ability to get to.
It's done in other communities. There's no reason why it couldn't be done here.
Again, this is a public facility, so. Because I said you can.
Okay.
Was there a consensus?
Yes, yeah. Before I ask the chairman if it's okay if I make a motion, I wanted to ask just a question. Do you know how often South Fork comes before the city planning commission or city commission to sort of give an update on what they're doing? What I'm thinking of is, let me tell you where I'm going with this, is that I know because of the conditional use permit we have with Metro, we ask them to show up once a year and say, hey, how's everything going at the Metro transfer station? It's all great, yay, thank you, it's a big love fest, and we all go home. And I'm wondering whether that review comes up with this between the city and South Fork, or has that ever been done?
The South Fork comes in front of the city annually and talks about water conservation.
You can nod, John.
All that.
Yeah. That's a really good question. And also, the mayor of Oregon City is a member of the South Fork Water Board, as well as 2 Oregon City commissioners. And it's my understanding, and it's been the policy for elected officials, they should share their meeting experience from South Fork back to the city commission in a public venue and talk about that as well. So when there's things that are action items that involving South Fork that involves the cities, they give reports back to the city, or should be giving reports back to the city. I can't mandate my bosses to do that, but that's history and protocol.
I just like to.
Well, let's not engage in
Well, no,
external
it was just
discussion
a
because the
question.
record's closed
Right,
and we
it's just
don't really
it was
want
just
to
a
bring in
question.
new
So
information.
I guess if you're okay, I would like to make a motion that we approve CP 1003 and CU 1003 as we have discussed, and we could ask Laura to go back and give us all of our amendments, but as we propose the, as amended and changes that we discussed here.
Condition of approval number 12 would require powder.
Nobody seconded yet, so.
Second.
Yep. Condition of approval number 12 would require the powder-coated fences. Condition of approval number 3, we would add the line, the community development director may work with the applicant to relocate the improvements within the right-of-way identified. Condition of approval number 22, as a part of the detailed development plan review, the applicant may submit a truck circulation plan and shall
And based on that plan,
if the interior parking lot landscaping cannot be accommodated, the applicant shall be required to locate the remaining interior landscaping in close proximity to the parking lot.
the interior landscaping which cannot be accommodated within the parking lot in close proximity to the lot.
Sounds good.
Okay.
Moved and seconded.
So we've got a motion and a second, and we'll ask for the roll.
And, you know, I'd love it if, since I'm going to be on here for 4 years, if John wants to come back informally and just tell us how things are going once a year. I would encourage that.
In close proximity.
No fee involved.
Tony?
Commissioner Groner.
Aye.
Commissioner Kidwell.
Aye.
Commissioner Espy.
Aye.
Commissioner Henkin.
Aye.
Commissioner Maybe.
Aye.
Commissioner McGriff.
Aye.
Chair Stein.
Aye.
Carries. Thank you.
With that,
I move we adjourn.
Second.
there's a motion to adjourn and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Tony, any announcements that we need to
I was
know?
just going to say, next time we'll try and we'll put together the goals and objectives from the previous planning commission so that we can revisit those. The city commission looks like they'll be adopting their goals and objectives hopefully on this Wednesday, the 16th. Projects that we'll be looking at moving forward, South End concept plan, we work with Metro to get that started and get that going utilizing construction excise tax money. The sign code
Yay!
fell off of their work agenda, so that will probably need to wait again. They did ask and directed us to start the Natural Resource Committee again, so planning will be undertaking that task, and I think a couple of initial concerns are dealing with habitat in the cove, the peninsula, and how that is where we did the bank stabilization project a couple of years ago, and reforestation, public, and where we can put trees in public spaces, public areas, and public parks throughout the city. We also did have a request from the South End Neighborhood Association to revisit and look at our policy and code requirements for street trees, sidewalk damage, sidewalk replacement, as that's the responsibility of the property owner whose frontage that occurs on. So there's been several trees popping sidewalks in some of the older neighborhoods in South End. We had kind of those smaller 2.5-foot planter strips instead of the 5-foot ones that we have now. So with that, we've also got the transportation system plan. We're working with DKS, was awarded the contract to amend, rewrite our TSP. So we'll be starting that hopefully in the near future. Laura worked quite a bit on that project. We applied for a grant, another transportation and growth management grant from ODOT for the second part of the circulation study for downtown to look at the transportation system for, I believe it's 5th or 6th, 8th, and 9th, as well as the alleyways, and then the two alleys going from Main Street down to 99E on the other side of the bridge. So hopefully we'll hear back from that in about 2 or 3 months. So that's, and then Christina's still working on the historic inventory for the CLG grant, looking at all the re-inventorying all the landmarks, the 86, 84 landmarks that there are, and then looking at about 1,600 homes that are now over 50 years old that have never been reviewed before.
We're looking at our mid-century modern in Oregon City.
Is that what we're calling it?
Well, unfortunately, our great mid-city modern bank downtown, that used to be the First Interstate Bank in the Oregon City Shopping Center, they kind of remodeled it. It was a great international style, and now it's not.
Great international
Yeah,
style.
there's a style called international style, and that's what that bank was when it was designed.
Yeah, but it's called great. No.
Well, I'm just using
Okay,
that.
well, thank you very much.
That's all I have.
It looks better than it does now.